And I think it would be good to start with Liz Ayling, who's a writer and a blogger. So perhaps, Liz, it would be good for us to hear what you make of some element of this strategic vision and what your perspective is. And I have said, you know, please be as brutal as you like.
Okay, thanks, Tony. I've lived in Malta 20 years. This is my 21st year, so I've known St. James Centre for Creativity since its inception. And it's always been a present part of my life. Throughout the year, there's, 6, 10 events I come to, or films I see, or more alternative drama performances that I come to. And I did a little exercise this morning. I tried to think about, when I'm not actually going to those little ad hoc things scattered throughout the year, what is my relationship with this centre? And also I wondered, what exactly is going on here when I'm not here? We know the routine, an envelope drops in the door, it's an invite to somebody you probably know, an artist, he has his exhibition opening, and there's going to be canapes, and there's going to be the glasses of wine, and you may or may not go, but you turn up, and there's generally the same group of people, and many of those events that I attend end up being a sort of social gathering. I think many people give a very cursory glance to whatever's hanging on the wall. They chat for 5 or 10 minutes after a performance, but it's a kind of socializing thing, really, more than perhaps really delving into the creativity of whatever we may be looking at or we've just seen performed. And that seemed a bit of a shame to me, that I'm there using it as a kind of a good night out rather than understanding what its remit is over time. So when I thought about what does it do in the day when I'm sitting at home at my computer, hopefully being creative, what exactly is going on? And I don't really know what goes on here. I know there'd be those exhibitions that I went to the opening of, they'd still be running for a couple of weeks. And I thought, well, there's a huge amount of floor space here, and I have no idea what's happening. Occasionally my son comes back from school, and he might have had a school outing to something at St. James. Again, they're very ad hoc and scattergun throughout the year. To be honest, when he's come back, he's never been wowed by what he's done or seen on any particular morning on that school trip. There's never been any perhaps legacy of or perhaps really intrinsic creativity going on. It's been a one-off thing to go and see, pretty much as I go to my social events or see the odd play. So I begin to be a little bit bewildered, and this is why Tony's vision about, the first question about who are we, what is the identity? And despite knowing St. James so well over these years, I really don't know. And it's always been a bit of a misnomer, the word creativity. I always saw it more as like an arts centre, like drop-in at the waterside or the riverside, places I used to go to in my former life in London. But it's not something I've been engaged in on an ongoing basis in a creative sense. I see creativity hanging on the wall, I appreciate it, but again, I'm a voyeur of that. So I would love to see it being more participatory. I would love to see it talk to people in more than just the traditional arts sense, because even when the kids turn up here, it's finger painting, or it's like role-playing for a morning, or it seems to be a very stereotypical view of what arts education or cultural education is. The other thing I think, and I'm going to sort of touch on some of the other speakers' fields as well, is the understanding of creativity. Now, at my son's school, and this won't be representative of all of them probably, but creativity gets, if it's talked about at all, it's very in the early years of schooling. When you still are putting on a plastic apron and doing very traditional painting and Play-Doh. As you go up the curriculum, by the time you got to senior school, there's no space for creativity. And I'm not talking creativity in terms of just the subjects that are called art or music or drama, which inevitably fall by the wayside once by the time kids choose their mat-sex subjects. Those are generally downgraded, and parents themselves are to blame for not talking to kids more generally about what constitutes an all-round education and choosing wisely on their subjects. But there's simply no space for this. And I also don't see creativity really coming into play in all of the subjects. I mean, why can't chemistry have creative aspect to it, or the science? It's true, over time, we have seen science in the city initiatives. We have seen a lot of these things that have been trying to widen the notion of creativity into all subject areas. There's Comic-Con, Science in the City. There's a lot of things that do happen, but again, I feel they're one-off events. So you come, you have a great weekend, sort of find your way around, and then it all dissipates. So that's the kind of legacy area. So I think if the word, I'd like to see St. James Centre for Creativity actually be that hub that you mentioned, probably in the first sentence. I work very much behind a screen and running the blogs that I do and engaging in people, and I have a lot of communication with expats and would-be expats to Malta, fielding questions on all sorts of things. Cultural life is one of them as well. And from my experience, a lot of expats will stick in their groupings. They simply exist here for whatever reason, but they don't really, even after 20 years, I feel I'm a voyeur rather than a participant. But what I do on screen in my day-to-day is I do a lot of peer-to-peer learning. I don't have this didactic learning like I have to attend a course, it has to be accredited. You know, the kind of old school system revamped for professional development in later life. So what I'd like to see happen here is maybe fora or a reason I could drop in during the day, a reason I could have communication with like-minded people and do a bit of peer-to-peer learning rather than be a voyeur of a performance or have some set event that has to take place on a weekend I may or may not be able to attend. But have a more ongoing daily relationship with creativity in all its forms, rather than me thinking, well, what happens in this space? Well, what do I need to do? Why am I going to go there apart from just drop in and have a coffee in the cafe? You know, quick 5 minutes around whatever exhibition happens to be on the wall that week. So I think there's a lot of leeway to develop a really robust day-to-day kind of vibe going on here. Otherwise, the space is somehow, it's a big building, you know, it's being wasted. And I have no reason to get in my car and come to Valletta or get on the bus and come to Valletta to see yet another exhibition on the wall. You know, that's what I feel anyway.
Thank you, Liz. That is indeed the sort of sentiment that has been shared in some of the events that we had in Maltese previously. So this isn't really, you know, an expat sort of thing. It's indeed, as I see it, at least something that people who have engaged with the creative sector, as you have in various ways, feel. And it's a fairly common observation, I find. And so thank you for
I didn't really want to touch on identity in the terms of cultural identity and national identity.
That's fine. You know
that is a big topic. But
yes.
It's true. I think a lot of expats don't really feel they need to engage. They're just here for the tax reasons, or the lifestyle, or the weather, or the health benefits, or it's, you know, they can hop over to London. And it's a shame that they're not engaged. But I think the schooling system, my son's school, there are a lot of foreigners there. And they do, you know, and my son too, he has the identity crisis of anything. They do exist apart from what is going on outside their door in Maltese. It is easy to exist here like that and not engage, which is why I said if you don't think about identity across cultural boundaries, but we use the space in a more peer-to-peer way. And my son is growing up thinking, it doesn't matter if I'm Maltese, does it matter if I'm, you know, the people he engages with at 12 via his blogs and what he does online, all types of nationalities. So in a way, he's not really thinking about his identity.
Well, and
he's
identity is fluid anyway.
Yeah,
so,
it's just existing.
So indeed. Well, thank you. And I think we could now turn to Ira Melkonian, who is a performer and a researcher, and some of you will know, active with the Rubber Bodies Collective. Ira, thank you for being with us here tonight. So perhaps we could have your perspective on this strategic vision.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tony. Well, actually, I wanted to start with sort of a reply to Liz and it's my comment as well. And I wanted to tell you thank you for doing this event in English. And actually, when you called and asked to participate, I felt like it was a nice decision, whoever it was, altogether, St. James Cavalier, because in the past couple of years, I kind of felt that Malta takes this turn towards promoting national language values, which I have full respect towards, and I try to learn Maltese as well. I understand a little bit, but Malta has this special, in my opinion, has this special position, being a location for all nationalities, and I find it as a strength for this location. So yeah, kind of taking conscious decision to opening it up to all the foreign people who live in Malta and who try to do something, who try to engage with the cultural scene, is for me an important decision. I appreciate that. So yeah, kind of in that sense, it's a response as well, because for me, when I came here, St. James Cavalier was one of the places when things were happening, and it wasn't only the exhibition location. Over the years, it was a rehearsal space many times. It was, it hosted many workshops as well, which are still happening. So I do agree that it's not used to its full capacity. It's a big building, and we can expand the purpose of using the space, but it's been various activities that took place for me here. But apart from identity, I would like to concentrate a bit more on the diversity. And in your presentation, what was interesting for me is that I'm like a true scientist. I'm like with my notes here, so we'll see what I will go through here. In your presentation, you mainly focused on outside aspect, or like a lot of it was at least about communicating with the outside world, taking works abroad, bringing artists from abroad, or collaborating with people in other countries, which is a very important aspect, because we do often feel a bit claustrophobic here because it's a small place and we want to see what's happening there, or like bring people here or go outside as well. But I didn't feel that there was enough emphasis on what's happening internally as well, on the diversity internally. And I know you called it outreach, and then there was in the brackets diversity, but I guess my main emphasis was on this subject of diversity. And coming from the background of work that we do, Rubber Bodies Collective is kind of considered to be an experimental theater company. And over the years of my work here and reflecting on what's happening on the island, I feel that this gap between experimental and classical work, in the sense of diversity range between experiment and between classic and tradition, is not very wide in Malta. And I think that this is one of the aspects that could be addressed, of how different is the work. How, like, if we take them as the extreme margins, yes, something very experimental and something really rooted in the tradition. These are two extremes. What is happening in between? What types of work can a person engage with? Can he, see, do at St. James, and maybe, generally in Malta as well. And this sort of brings me to why I feel this range is not very wide. And one of the main answers that comes to my mind is that the audience that we have here is not very open, or is not ready to engage with different sort of with different marginal works. There is, again, a tradition, and this is what people are used to seeing and engaging and reacting to. So when an artist takes a decision to come out of this safety margin, it's a risk. It's a risk whether you find your audience, whether you find people who can read that sort of artwork. And I did a bit of homework, and I went a bit through the website, and in the mission of St. James currently, it states, I think, point number 3, St. James Cavalier has to play an important role in developing aesthetic education for the young generations, or, that's my interpretation of it. But I think, the key point there is aesthetic and young generations. And I find it I find it a key thing in maybe education point that you mentioned in your presentation, that most of the points that were described there were kind of developing artistic abilities of people, workshops for artists, workshop for kids to develop their creativity. And obviously, all of us are speaking about being creative and being aspiring to be an artist these days. But we don't speak that much about building an audience and what role do we play into bringing up people who can engage with an artwork, who can give it an interpretation, who have this sort of wonder, to be open to engage with experimental works. Well, that's my sore point, my background, no? Just to be open to a wider range of diverse works. And yet, and this is aesthetic education also brings up a point in my mind that over the past couple of years, many workshops that I took part in here, the subject matter that were touched upon, and well, even in my work, we often had the problem of having banal or sentimental kind of approach to art, and yeah, that would be the way of what people would choose as subject matter, what would be the interpretation. And I don't blame the people because that's how kind of it was developed, but it was never, well, I didn't feel that it was ever addressed in any strategical vision proposals of what to do with banality and with, yeah, just aesthetic choices, because a lot of people, even the purest young artists who want to do something new and whatever new for the art, they still choose something that most probably my grandma would have chosen as a subject. But why does it happen? What role does St. James play in it? What can we do about this aesthetic choices and education? Informal education, well, no, I guess I can finish on that. And yes, it will be a nice bridge to legacy, because you mentioned the documentation of performance artworks, which maybe St. James can take place in, and obviously this is something very interesting for me, and I don't think it's a very wide practice in Malta yet, so this is something very innovative. The legacy of performance art.
Indeed. Well, I'm sure you know you will express more of your thoughts later on, even, you know, I mean, but thank you so much for that, Ira. The thing I wanted to say is, because I pulled it up here, the third point that you mentioned from the mission statement is indeed very close to the way you remembered it. It says fostering aesthetic and cultural awareness among the younger generation, which is indeed, you know, the schools and the children perspective in relation to the work that we do, and this is definitely an essential component. In 2004, for example, about 84 schools were present within this building with their school children, and clearly some of these schools had more than one class coming to activities here, and in many cases coming more than once. Clearly this is an essential part.
I guess just like my emphasis in all that was that even though this awareness is happening and is being promoted, but kind of the shift in it is that to promote aesthetic awareness as to develop creativity in kids, but not really to tell them you're the future. Because actually being an audience member is as important and as difficult actually as creating, well, whatever, maybe we can discuss what's more, but it's a very important part.
Well, indeed, that's another can of worms similar to the one that Liz mentioned in terms of cultural identity. This is audience development.
Absolutely.
In this case. And so we'll leave that can for now, but we will open it, if not tonight, perhaps on another occasion. Which brings us beautifully to Milena Dobreva. Milena Dobreva and I are kindred spirits in some ways, in that we are both information scientists to some degree. She's the real thing, though. I have only been moonlighting as an information scientist for the last few years. And Milena is from the department where information science is handled at the University of Malta. She's a professor there. But she and I have had many conversations, and many long conversations, I should say, about this idea of a systematic need for documenting and preserving, or rather archiving, if you will, the documents that remain from audiovisual activities mainly that relate, in this particular case, to the creative industries. So Milena, now it's your turn. So please.
Thank you, Tony. I'm definitely not going to give a lecture on preservation tonight, but I wanted to start with a little personal story. 3 years ago, so I'm the one who spent less time here in Malta. 3 years ago, when I was coming to Malta, one of my very esteemed colleagues who works now in Canada, said, you go to Malta and you have to create legacy there. So I came with this mission in his mind. And after I spent some time looking around and trying to understand better the background and the needs, I realized that Maltese language doesn't have its word for legacy. There are words for heritage, which is something different. So I don't know what word you used, Tony, when you had your presentation.
Well, it's actually the one for inheritance. Really.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's heredita, which would be inheritance.
Yes. So I have to speak about legacy in a way in a setting where this concept might be difficult in some sense, which brings us again to the awareness, which is one of the big tasks for the center here. So legacy, what sort of legacy? When we speak in this setting of a center for creativity, I think that we deal with something which is difficult to describe and difficult to capture. If this was a center which was promoting creative industries, for example, you would have more chances to measure what it is expected to do, because there is a better definition what the creative industries entail, and you could have a sort of a clear metric on your success. Creativity, I think, is a very difficult concept, and for me it always goes hand in hand with passion. So can you teach children to be passionate? Because you mentioned something about the education of children. It's excellent to have a place which promotes this, and I believe that this is very important for the life of everyone, even if people don't really think about it this way. But I think there is a big issue of how this could be captured, documented, and measured in some way. The fact that the center was doing different things throughout the years for me is very natural, because this is the process of looking for your own identity. So the diversity of different activities actually should help to crystallize what this center actually is about, which obviously needs to be linked with the national needs and with the cultural priorities, I would say. I was a bit worried about the initial remark that the communication with the government offices sometimes is problematic, because actually the center helps in a domain which also is a national priority. So what can be captured and what can be preserved in this sense? I will refer to the work of our first master student who is graduating this academic year, Andrea Lamango, who was a guest, I think, in the previous,
last one,
yes, in the previous IDE discussion, and he is working also in this domain of audiovisual heritage. And at one point, he arrived to a conclusion that there is a lot of awareness and a lot of care when we speak about the tangible heritage. So some of the things here in the center are tangible, like there are works of art which are collected as donations from everyone who had an exhibition here. So that's tangible, and it's probably easy to document, even if this is not systematically done. On the other hand, the center works, I think, even more in the area of intangible. So the performances, the discussions, the educational activities, which currently are not, I believe, are not documented, are all very interesting, and they are in a way showing the milestones of development of the thinking of the nation in this area of creativity and maybe creative industries, if I go back to my previous point. So from this point of view, I think that there is a lot of space for development, and this crystallization of ideas, what the center is doing and where is its actual remit, will come, I suppose, to more clarity in the near future, I hope. What I also wanted to say as an observation is that you had a lot of questions for discussion, One which was a bit hidden, a bit obscure, was the audience question, for whom all this is being done. So there was the question, who are our collaborators? But this question, who is the audience? What do we want to do with the audience, was a bit left aside. So probably it also needs to come forward. As,
absolutely. So it's always heartening to hear colleagues and friends they speak about some of the things that I've been proposing for the center, of course, and indeed, I mean the for whom, the immediate for whom is essentially people in this room and people who have come to this room for these discussions, but then with the multiplier effect, the people who work with those individual people who are, I mean, many people even in this room have had their work presented within the Center for Creativity. And so I think that in some ways is, without prioritizing, our first audience, really. In that I know that some of the people I see in this room today have come to more than one of these sessions. They are blessed to understand Maltese, of course, but I think we should have even more conversation, and not just in Maltese, as Ira pointed out. Having these conversations in English too is essential. But the reason for having conversations in Maltese was deliberate, particularly on my part, because the feedback that I had received when I first came here was that some people felt excluded because too many conversations were not being had in Maltese. So that's the can of worms on that one, perhaps. But in the interest of time, because we don't want to be here till kingdom come, of course, I'd like to open it up to anyone else in the room who wants to either react to anything I said in my presentation of the strategic vision, or anything that our guest interlocutors here who have reacted to the strategic vision, with the benefit, if you will, of some of the conversations that we've had over the last few days. It's entirely up to you. We have a couple of roving mics. My colleagues Carmen and Maria here will bring a microphone to you, and the main reason we bring a microphone to you is not so that you can be heard in the room, but so that whatever you say can be captured on the video recording.